It was a quiet Saturday morning in our small suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows each other's names. Lawns are trimmed to perfection, and the air smells faintly of coffee and fresh grass. For the most part, it was peaceful, exactly what I needed for my family, especially my daughter, Lily. She's only 8 years old, full of life and imagination, but she battles a rare respiratory condition that forces her to rely on an oxygen machine around the clock. We've learned to live with the constant hum of medical equipment in our home. It's not ideal, but we've adapted. The local hospital is only 10 minutes away, and we've installed multiple backup systems to keep her stable in case of emergencies. Every choice we make, where we live, how we set up our home, even where the outlets go, is with her health in mind. Still, nothing prepared me for what was coming. Our neighborhood falls under the watchful eye of an HOA, a homeowners association that enforces every little rule with military precision. And at the center of it all is Karen. She's the type who thrives on power she didn't earn, someone who lives to point out how your trash can was visible for 30 seconds too long, or that your blinds are half an inch the wrong color. I'd had a few run-ins with her before, nothing major, just your standard passive-aggressive notices taped to my door. I let it go for the sake of peace, but that peace would soon be shattered in the most unthinkable way. Because one day Karen decided that the cords running along the side of our house, connected to Lily's oxygen supply, were a violation of HOA aesthetics. And without warning, she took action. She had no idea who I was, or what she had just done. Karen had a presence that seemed to dominate every block she walked. She didn't just live in the neighborhood. She ruled it, or at least that's what she believed. Tall, sharp-featured, and always impeccably dressed in pastel-colored suits, she carried a clipboard like it was a badge of honor. No holiday decoration, no misplaced recycling bin, no child's chalk drawing on the sidewalk escaped her scrutiny. She appointed herself the guardian of suburban perfection, quoting the HOA manual like scripture, and enforcing rules with a zeal that bordered on obsession. Most neighbors did their best to tolerate her. They'd nod politely at her forced smiles, comply with her nitpicky warnings, and quietly complain behind closed doors. I, too, tried to stay out of her way. I knew her type well, people who found power in places where there shouldn't be any. She didn't care about community. She cared about control. She was the kind of person who could turn the color of your mailbox into a neighborhood scandal. And if she saw an opportunity to assert herself, she never hesitated. My first personal encounter with her came a few months after we moved in. I had parked a little too close to the curb, and within hours a note was left under my windshield wiper in bold black marker. "This is not a parking lot. Respect the rules." It was signed simply, the HOA. From that moment on, I knew we were on her radar. Over time, the notes became more frequent, about a planter being out of place, a fence that hadn't been painted fast enough, and eventually the extension cords we installed outside to support Lily's medical equipment. Karen didn't ask questions. She didn't knock on the door to see if there was a reason for what she saw. She didn't care that the cords were part of an emergency backup plan for a child who couldn't survive without a constant supply of oxygen. All she saw was something out of order, something that didn't fit her curated image of the neighborhood. And that, in her eyes, was unforgivable. She had a mission, and she was determined to complete it, no matter the cost. Lily's condition was something we never talked about lightly. Diagnosed when she was just 5, her lungs had never developed fully. She required a constant supply of oxygen to keep her blood levels stable, especially during the night. We'd built our lives around keeping her safe. Doctors, specialists, home nurses, and a house filled with backup systems that would make a small hospital jealous. It wasn't overkill. It was survival. One missed hour, one power outage without a fallback, and we'd be in the emergency room praying she'd make it. Every beep of her monitor was a reminder that our daughter walked a tightrope between comfort and catastrophe. We had carefully laid out the system to keep things running smoothly. The main oxygen concentrator was stationed in her room, discreet and silent. A backup battery system stood by in case of internal failure. And for added protection, we had an external portable generator ready, hooked through a covered extension cord that connected to her medical setup in case of a power loss. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't ugly, it was necessary. Every part of it was positioned safely and in compliance with city codes. Still, the cord that ran along the side of the house seemed to offend Karen's sensibilities. It started with a note, of course. External wires are unsightly. Please remove immediately. HOA Guidelines. Section 3.2. We ignored it at first, assuming that any reasonable person, once informed about the medical need, would understand. But Karen wasn't reasonable. A few days later, she left another message, more direct and threatening. Failure to comply will result in formal action. Still, I believed she wouldn't dare push it further. After all, this was about a child's life. I was at City Hall when the call came through. My wife was in tears. Lily had gone pale, her breathing shallow and labored. The oxygen machine had shut down. The backup wasn't kicking in. My heart froze. In a flurry of panic, my wife rushed to the generator set up outside, only to find it disconnected. The cord had been neatly rolled up, tagged with a warning sticker from the HOA. The machine, helpless, blinked red. An ambulance arrived just in time. Paramedics stabilized her, pumping her lungs with air while my wife sobbed on the floor. Lily's little chest finally rose again, but just barely. And in that moment, our lives changed. Not just because of what almost happened, but because someone had dared to make a choice that could have killed our daughter in the name of enforcing a rule. The moment I stepped into the hospital room and saw Lily lying there, her tiny face drained of color, a tangle of wires around her, and her chest rising with mechanical assistance, something inside me cracked. My wife sat beside her, still clutching Lily's favorite stuffed animal, her eyes red from hours of tears. I walked over, placed my hand on her shoulder, and asked what happened. Her voice trembled as she told me everything. It had been a normal afternoon. Lily had been painting by the window, her oxygen mask snug and her spirits high. The weather had been warm, so my wife decided to open the windows and let in a little breeze. She was in the kitchen, just a few steps away, when she noticed the oxygen monitor beeping. At first, she thought it was a glitch. Maybe the cord had come loose. But when she ran outside to check the backup generator, she stopped in her tracks. The cord was gone. It wasn't just unplugged. It had been completely removed, coiled up like garden hose, and left beside the HOA's standard issue warning placard. Unauthorized external wiring. Violation of neighborhood standards. Immediate removal enforced. Karen's signature smugness practically dripped from every line. My wife screamed, rushed back in, and grabbed the phone. She called 911 while simultaneously trying to get the backup battery running. But the panic, the adrenaline, it all made everything harder. The battery had drained during the last week's storm and hadn't been fully recharged. The generator had been our primary fallback, and now it was useless. When the paramedics arrived, Lily was unconscious. Her lips were starting to turn blue. They stabilized her, but even they were furious when they heard why the machine had failed. "Who cuts power to a child's oxygen system?" one of them muttered while adjusting her airflow. I didn't have an answer. Not yet. I left the hospital that night filled with something beyond anger. I drove straight home. The neighborhood was quiet, every house tucked in, lights glowing softly behind curtains. But Karen's porch light was bright. Too bright. Like a spotlight. Like a challenge. She stood there, arms crossed, watching me pull into the driveway. No shame, no remorse, just that same smug look, as if she had done the neighborhood a favor. I walked up to her calmly, asked her if she'd removed the cord. She didn't even flinch. "You were warned," she said. "You can't have random wires strung all over the place. It's a safety hazard." I stared at her, stunned at the irony, my voice low. "You disconnected my daughter's oxygen. She nearly died." Karen scoffed. "Maybe you should have followed the rules then." She still didn't know who I was. Still didn't realize that she hadn't just declared war on a neighbor. She had picked a fight with the mayor of the city, and from that moment on, I was done playing nice. The rules she clung to so tightly were about to turn against her in ways she never imagined. The next morning, I stood in my office at City Hall, watching the sunrise bleed across the skyline through tall windows. My phone buzzed with messages, doctors updating me on Lily's condition, my wife checking in, and a few close friends who had heard rumors. I didn't respond right away. I was drafting something far more important. I made a call to the city's legal department, then to the head of code enforcement, and finally to a trusted journalist who'd covered community stories with integrity. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was criminal negligence disguised as neighborhood maintenance. By noon, I was standing at Karen's front door again, this time not as her neighbor, but as the city's top elected official, backed by investigators and 2 officers from the Municipal Code Division. Karen opened the door with that same plastic smile, clearly annoyed but trying to play it cool. "Back again? If this is about your little tantrum last night, I suggest you cool off. I followed procedure. Your wires violated section ... I cut her off, my tone measured but unmistakably firm. "Karen, you knowingly tampered with a life-sustaining medical setup. That's not a violation of HOA policy. That's a violation of state law." Her expression faltered for the first time, brows twitching, lips parting slightly in surprise. "You're bluffing," she said, but her voice lacked the conviction it had before. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm the mayor, and you've just put yourself at the center of an official city investigation." Her eyes widened, and the clipboard she so religiously carried slipped a little in her grasp. She looked around, suddenly aware that neighbors had started to gather, peeking through curtains and stepping onto porches. The news was spreading fast. One of the investigators stepped forward and handed her a formal notice, an order to cease and desist all further HOA enforcement actions pending review. Karen's mouth opened to protest, but nothing came out. Her authority had been stripped in a matter of minutes, and all I did was speak the truth and follow the law she had so flagrantly ignored. That evening, I visited Lily again. She was sitting up in bed, coloring with her oxygen tube securely in place. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Did you fix it, Daddy?" she asked softly. I knelt beside her and kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm fixing everything." But even as I smiled for her, I knew this wasn't over. There were deeper issues at play. Abuse of power, unchecked authority, and the blind worship of rules over humanity. Karen's downfall had only just begun, and I wasn't going to stop until I made sure no other family ever had to face what we did. By the end of the week, the atmosphere in the neighborhood had shifted completely. What once had been a place where people quietly complied with Karen's rigid rules out of fear or inconvenience had become a community on the edge of uprising. It started with whispers, neighbors chatting by mailboxes, on porches, exchanging stories they had previously kept to themselves. One by one, they came forward. Notes Karen had left on their doors. Fines for minor violations. Threats of legal action over flower beds that didn't match HOA-approved pallets. She had ruled with a pen and a clipboard for years, but no one had ever thought to challenge her. Until now. The story about Lily's oxygen being cut off traveled faster than I expected. A local news outlet had picked it up, and soon, footage of paramedics rushing into our house and my confrontation with Karen aired on the evening segment. People were shocked, outraged. Parents, especially, took it personally. That someone could be so heartless, so obsessed with order, that they'd endanger a child just to enforce a cosmetic regulation. It was unthinkable. And the fact that she showed no remorse, that she stood proudly behind her decision, only made it worse. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Karen tried to cancel it, of course, claiming she had too much on her plate, and that it was not an appropriate time. But no one listened. The turnout was massive. Residents who hadn't attended a meeting in years showed up, many holding documentation of their own experiences with Karen's enforcement tactics. A neighbor brought photos of their child's lemonade stand being shut down. Another described receiving 3 separate violation notices in a single week. One for a lawn ornament, one for a garden hose left out, and another for a car window left slightly open overnight. The stories poured out. I sat quietly near the back, not as mayor, but as a father. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply explained what had happened, what it nearly cost us, and how the power of community should never be used to threaten its most vulnerable. When I finished, the room was silent. Then someone stood up and said what everyone else was thinking. She has to go. A vote was taken on the spot. In accordance with the HOA bylaws, a simple majority could remove a board president under extraordinary circumstances. The count wasn't even close. Karen was voted out, stripped of her position and barred from holding any leadership role within the HOA again. She stood there, frozen, still holding her clipboard like a security blanket that no longer had any power. The community didn't just reject her, they reclaimed their voice. And for the first time in years, it felt like we weren't just living in a neighborhood. We were part of something stronger, something united. In the days that followed, Karen disappeared from the sidewalks she once patrolled like a warden. Her porch, once adorned with seasonal perfection, sat bare. The clipboard was gone. No more notes taped to mailboxes. No more morning walks with a measuring tape. For the first time, the neighborhood exhaled. But I wasn't done. I knew from experience that systems don't change just because one person is removed. Real change happens when rules are rewritten, when silence is replaced with structure, and when the vulnerable are protected by more than goodwill. At City Hall, I worked with legal advisors and community outreach coordinators to draft a new ordinance. It wouldn't override legitimate HOA powers, but it would make it illegal for any community organization to interfere with medically necessary equipment on private property. Fines would be issued. Licenses could be revoked. More importantly, an anonymous complaint system would be established to report HOA overreach. What Karen did to Lily would never happen to another family again, not under my watch. Back in the neighborhood, I received thank you notes, quiet handshakes from neighbors who had lived under Karen's shadow for years. Some apologized for not speaking out sooner. Others shared stories they had buried, not wanting to stir trouble. But I didn't blame them. I understood how fear can silence even the strongest voices. What mattered was that they were speaking now. The community was healing. Karen, on the other hand, tried to fight back. She filed a complaint, attempted to get her position reinstated, argued that her actions were justified under the HOA guidelines. But with legal pressure mounting, and after being served with a lawsuit on behalf of my family, her foundation crumbled. The insurance premiums for the HOA spiked. The board voted to settle privately. Karen was required to pay restitution, and under growing community pressure, she listed her home for sale. Within a month, she was gone. I never raised my voice. I never resorted to insults or public humiliation. I didn't need to. The truth spoke louder than outrage, and the law was my quiet weapon. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting the innocent and reminding people that power, real power, is measured by how you use it when the spotlight is off and no one's clapping. One evening, as I walked Lily home from her first day back at school, she looked up at me with wide eyes and asked, "Daddy, is she gone?" I smiled and nodded. "Yes, baby, she's gone." She squeezed my hand and leaned into my side, breathing steady and safe. That night, as the stars peeked through the sky above our quiet street, I sat on the porch and listened, not for footsteps or citations, but for silence. The kind of silence that comes after a storm, the kind that means peace has finally returned. And this time, it was ours to keep. Looking back now, it still amazes me how something as simple as a cord, a thin line running along the side of a house, could become the tipping point for so much change. It wasn't about the wire, of course. It was about what it represented: compassion versus control, life versus regulation, humanity versus bureaucracy. I've always believed that leadership isn't about titles or power, but about protecting what matters most. And sometimes, protecting what matters means standing up not just for your family, but for your community, even when it's uncomfortable. Lily's recovery was slow but steady. The doctors were optimistic, and every day she seemed a little stronger, a little brighter. She started sleeping through the night again, her oxygen levels holding strong, her laugh returning with the sunlight. My wife and I clung to those moments, the small victories that reminded us why we had to speak out, why silence was never an option when our child's life hung in the balance. We had been pushed into a corner, but we emerged with a voice louder than any citation Karen could ever write. The neighborhood changed too. Not overnight, but in the ways that matter. People smiled more, stopped to talk a little longer at the mailbox, waved from their porches instead of quickly disappearing inside. There was a sense of warmth that hadn't existed before, as if everyone finally realized that rules were supposed to protect us, not cage us. We weren't just residents anymore. We were neighbors. Karen's absence was a reminder of what unchecked authority can become. But more importantly, her removal was proof that even the most stubborn grip on power can be broken when people come together. We didn't scream. We didn't threaten. We acted with purpose. That's what made the difference. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. And we got it. As for Lily, she recently made a short video for her school project. It was simple, recorded on a tablet, her little voice steady and sweet. She thanked the neighbors for helping her feel safe again, and then, in her own words, she said, "I don't remember everything that happened, but I know that my daddy and all of you made it better." I watched that clip more times than I'll admit, and every time it reminded me why I do what I do, not for recognition, not for politics, but for the people who depend on us to do the right thing, especially when it's hard. So if you're watching this, and you're dealing with someone like Karen, someone who uses rules to strip away dignity, who forgets that behind every home is a story, a struggle, a heartbeat, don't be afraid to stand up. Your quiet power might just be louder than you think. And when justice comes, let it be steady, let it be kind, and let it leave behind a peace that no one can take away.